of Livermore. Andy will present the latest update to the Livermore General Plan. Andy has served the city of Livermore as an assistant planner, associate planner, senior planner, and now economic development planner in his almost 10 years with the city of Livermore. Also today will be Brandon Cardwell, Innovation and Economic Development Director for the city of Livermore. Brandon has worked for the city for 17 years and is a Livermore native. Brandon is one of the founders and past executive directors of Daybreak Labs, an innovation hub in Livermore. So welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for having us. I'm really here for moral support for Andy only. I think most, if not all of you, but I'm Brandon Cardwell, Director of Innovation and Economic Development for the City of Livermore. It may seem a little unusual to have a general plan update being led by folks who reside in the Innovation and Economic Development Department. It's normally a community development department activity. And the reason for that is that when we started this project a couple years ago, Andy was in community development. And then I asked him to join my office when we had an economic development manager opening to bring some land use expertise into the work that we were doing. And since that time, our two departments have really collaborated well to think about how we plan for Livermore's growth and development over the next 20 to 25 years. So I'll let Andy take it from there. He's the project manager for this project, among other things he does, mostly related to land use in my office. So thanks for having us, and Andy, take it away.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks everybody for, as Brandon said, having us this morning. So really quickly, we're trying to condense about 2 years worth of work for a general plan update and provide that to you in about 15 minutes. So it'll be a high level overview, but wanted to share with you what the general plan is, although Mayor Marchand did a great job of orienting us this morning, so we can kind of breeze through that. Really want to focus on land use and the different land use alternatives we've created with help and input from our General Plan Advisory Committee, and then ways in which we're asking the community and you all to provide input, and then hopefully have time left over for some questions and answers and a bit of a discussion. So the general plan is our fundamental land use document. It's a leading policy document, and it really is going to drive how we grow and conserve our resources into the horizon year of 2045. And its purpose is to guide fair and consistent decision making as the lead policy document. It's made up of a variety of elements or chapters, but again, we're focused primarily right now on land use. After we get through the land use alternatives process that I'm about to go into, we will take a deeper dive into some policy frameworks around all these other topics, including circulation, open space and conservation, noise, public safety, etc. All these elements are currently in the current Livermore General Plan. The elements listed on the left are required by the state, but the state allows local jurisdictions to add as many elements as necessary to support the local context. So we have those listed on the right side of the screen. And just to illustrate the point a little further, the general plan is our lead policy document. So it sits on top of the hierarchy of all of our other planning documents. It's implemented through things like our development code or zoning specific plans, like our downtown specific plan or Isabel neighborhood specific plan, or other topic area plans like active transportation or climate change. Those are then further implemented through private development applications, the city's budgeting process, or our capital improvement program. Again, 2 years worth of work in the making. So we've completed things like visioning, where we went out to the community, asked them what they wanted to see, how Livermore should look and feel and be like in 2045. And we've conducted extensive research and analysis to establish baseline conditions or existing conditions reports. And we were one of the first Bay Area cities to actually complete our housing element update, which is a required element that needs to be updated every 8 years to meet states' housing requirements. Currently, we're in the land use alternatives process, which I'll get to in a moment, and that's going to start shaping policy development. And we did kick off our general plan EIR. All those pieces are going to get packaged up into a draft general plan document, and we anticipate that being public or completed within about a year. I'd mentioned visioning. In addition to a vision statement, our advisory committee came up with these guiding principles to support that vision. So we look back to these elements when we think about land use and our future land use patterns. We want to make sure we're achieving all of these things. So I keep using the term land use. Land use is one of those elements in our general plan. It will have designation, so it tells you category of land use, what types of uses would be permitted in that land use designation, and describes a bit of what the density or intensity of that land use would be at any given location. And then there's a corresponding map. And so that's what we're really working in right now. The map is showing us all these different colors, and each of the colors are telling us what can be built and where, and again, at what intensity or density. So when we looked at the existing general plan map, which is on your screen, we knew that we wouldn't necessarily be wiping the slate clean. We have existing neighborhoods, we have existing shopping districts or business districts, and we've done extensive planning in places like downtown or the Isabel neighborhood specific plan. So one of the first things we asked our advisory committee and the community is, where should we look at potential changes to land use or this land use map? And the committee came up with these, what we call focus areas. So you're looking at a map of the city of Livermore, and each of the colored polygons represents a focus area. And we have 3 different land use alternatives or scenarios for each. So if you can see my cursor, this is 580 right here. Downtown is generally in this area. And then this is South Livermore and Greenville Road, just to orient us. So I'll walk through really quickly each of these focus areas and the different land use alternatives for each. So the first one we have is the Laughlin Road focus area. So this is 580 right here. You can see my cursor. Everyone can see my cursor, correct? Okay. So here's 580 right here, and then Laughlin Road going north to south. So you can see from the aerial that most of the land is undeveloped. But if you look to the right of the screen, you can see this is an excerpt from the existing general plan land use map. It does have urban land use designations. That's in part because of there was an anticipated BART station in this location during the last general plan update. And so some of these blues represent where a station could be, or maintenance yards or tracks. And then some of the browns and tans represent where housing would go around the station area. But since that time, BART has decided not to move further east. And instead, we have the new Valley Link rail system, which was mentioned earlier. And so the advisory committee thought, well, if there's not going to be a BART station in this area and Valley Link has chosen other locations for station areas, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to have these urban land use designations at this location. And so came up with 3 different land use alternatives for this focus area. And I'll walk through them really quickly. Again, each of the colors represent different land use types. So the green represents open space, and that could be natural open space for conservation purposes. It could be passive recreation. It could be for other purposes like flood control, etc. But each one of the alternatives has a significant amount of open space and then concentrates any sort of proposed urban development in this area here. So in the open space alternative, we have a low density residential place type next to a high density residential place type, and a little bit of general industrial here, and then some highway commercial in these teardrop parcels off the off ramp. And then the mixed use alternative, similarly, we've got low density residential, a band of medium density residential around a neighborhood park. And then that's all buffered by this pink color, which represents a neighborhood commercial. And so the intent there was to provide some amenities to this neighborhood, an existing neighborhood, but also buffer some of the residential from the freeway and North Front Road. And then lastly, we've got a medium density residential, a green linear parkway, high density residential, and then again, similarly, instead of neighborhood commercial, we have some industrial, and then we've expanded the highway commercial. So as we look at all these different alternatives and we go out to the community to ask their input, we're not asking for anyone to necessarily select one of these alternatives and say that's the favorite. What we are asking is, which of these elements do you like? And maybe we can mix and match them to create a preferred land use scenario for this area, which then will ultimately get integrated into that citywide map I showed you earlier. So each one of these focus areas has some build out projections. These are the bar charts just to show you different scale. But really what it assumes is full build out at 2045. So if the market were to respond and private property owners and investors were to develop these under these land use designations, this is what it could look like in 2045. So this just provides that scale. As we move on to Las Positas Court, this is I-580 right here, and this is Livermore Avenue. And the Chick-fil-A and In-N-Out are here as point of reference. This area is mostly open space with some highway serving uses and low-lying industrial uses. And that is consistent with the land use map shown on the right. The advisory committee thought maybe this could be an area to introduce some housing into this area, create better connectivity with the existing neighborhood, maybe enhance Livermore Avenue as an entryway into the community. And so came up with 3 different alternatives. The first one basically keeps everything mostly the same with this open space and this industrial office designation, and then adds a low density residential place type south of Las Positas. Similarly, there is in the neighborhood center alternative, instead of open space, there's this agricultural place type, with the thought being that if it were cultivated ag or vines or something to that effect, that would signal to one entering the community that they are now in Livermore, and it creates that gateway or entryway effect. We maintain the industrial office place types here. South of Las Positas, we have a medium density residential and then a small piece of neighborhood commercial, that pink color again, to round out the 4 corners of that intersection. And then lastly, highway oriented is the more intense, where we have mix of general industrial and industrial office on both sides of the arroyo, and then a medium high residential density proposed for the area south of Las Positas Court. So if we look at what the build out would be in 2045, assuming everything were to turn over, this is what that would look like. Next up is what we call the Vasco Row focus area. We got East Avenue here and Vasco Road here. So Vasco Road is a primary gateway into wine country. And over time, this area has started to introduce wineries and breweries and other similar uses. It's mostly an industrial area, and those are actually industrial processes, winemaking, breweries, etc. So over time, they've started to move into this area, consistent with the current zoning. The zoning allows for a small ancillary commercial component, like tasting rooms and sales. But there was a thought that could be accelerated or expanded upon through the general plan update process, and that there's demand there for these types of uses and facilities. So with that in mind, the advisory committee came up with 3 different alternatives. We have a Maker Village alternative, which introduces a medium high density residential place type into this area, surrounded by a green or a park or a neighborhood park. And then we've introduced a new place type. So this is a mixed industrial commercial designation, or a maker space. This would allow for the making of a product and a sale of a product on the same site. So we just mentioned wineries and breweries being the one we're most familiar with, but it could apply to things like coffee roasters, furniture makers, etc. So it's meant to cater to a craft or artisan type of industry. And then on the east side of Vasco Road, we have what's called wine country commercial place type. That's taken from our South Livermore Valley specific plan, where we reference wine country commercial uses. Even though it has wine in the title, It doesn't necessarily mean a winery. It means visitor serving uses, so specialty goods, retail, restaurants or eateries, things that would help enhance the visitor experience in wine country or this area. So if we look at the next alternative, the production alternative, there's no residential proposed in this particular alternative. It's basically split between this maker place type and the wine country commercial place type, and then the park has been moved to the east side of Vasco Road. And then lastly, we have a wine country center alternative where we have medium residential proposed nearer East Avenue. The park has been relocated back along Research Drive, and then we have all the wine country commercial as the remainder. So this is what the build out would look like based on these different scenarios in the year 2045. So the next focus area is the Midtown focus area. This is one of the larger focus areas. This is I-580 right here. And then we've got First Street and then Vasco Road. So along 580 in this general location is where the Southfront Valley Link station is proposed. And so given that location plus the location of the existing ACE station, the committee thought this might be a good place to consider into the future a new neighborhood, a mixed-use neighborhood, a complete neighborhood that has a variety of different housing types, job-generating uses, and then commercial retail and services. And so if you look at the existing land use pattern, we have mostly industrial uses, but it's mostly industrial storage uses. And so it's underdeveloped, and there's some potential there to turn it into that neighborhood over time. So if we look at each of the different alternatives, we're trying to achieve that mix of uses, but in different proportions. So the business center alternative, if we see the Valley Link station here in 580, most of the housing is located near the station area and kind of along these axes here. And then the rest remains this purplish color, or that general industrial. And then this alternative also adds some higher density housing near the ACE station on the west side of Vasco Road. If we look at the residential neighborhood alternative, it's mostly residential uses. Again, it's got higher density housing closest to the Valley Link station, and then it begins to feather out the further one gets away from the station. So you have medium, high density, and medium density housing. This hatch mark represents mixed use corridors, so ground floor retail or commercial uses with above floor residential uses, a linear greenway with a central park, and then again, this purple color, which is industrial uses. Near the A station, looked at place types that accommodate medium, high density residential. And then lastly, we've got the blended alternative, and it basically splits the focus area in two. So everything to the west is mostly residential, and everything to the east is mostly general industrial, and it's separated by a linear greenway and a mixed use corridor. Over by the A station, however, we have a mix of high density neighborhood commercial and medium density uses. And then again, in this one, we've added that maker space designation into it, just to maybe maintain some of the industrial buildings, but also allow them to have some flexibility of uses where they can provide an amenity to the new neighborhood. So this is what build out would look like over time into 2045 if everything were to be built. And so you can see the range and scale. And one of the things this focus area allows us to do or think about is how we achieve our state housing requirements over time. So I did mention we fulfilled our current housing element needs for this, what we call cycle. That goes to about 2030, 2031, because our general plan is looking out to 2045. That provides an opportunity to start thinking about the next cycle and how we might accommodate that in the future. And then lastly, we have the east of Greenville focus area. So just to orient us really quickly, this is 580 here, and then Greenville Road runs north to south. And then this is Tesla Road and South Livermore Valley down here. The squiggly line represents the South Bay Aqueduct. And then we have our existing industrial area and the labs to the east. And so this was actually added a little later in the process when going through our preliminary evaluation. The advisory committee suggested that we look at other places where we can accommodate industrial growth or job generating uses, really to create an identity for Livermore as a leader in innovation and technology, but also to make sure we're maintaining a balance and a match between the types of housing we have and the types of jobs we have. And then we also looked at the existing focus areas and what some of the new place types would do over time. So we noticed that it would actually take away from that industrial inventory. And then with information provided by some of the commercial brokers who operate in our community, also pointed out that over the last general plan cycle, we've absorbed about 700 acres of industrial land. So that was raw land that was built out and or converted to something else. And so if that trend continues, we wanted to make sure we had capacity for those types of uses moving forward. So right now, this focus area is outside the city limits. It's under the jurisdiction of Alameda County. It's also outside the city's urban growth boundary. So for any of the land use alternatives, which I'm about to show you, to become a reality, the city would have to annex the territory and the urban growth boundary would have to be adjusted. And that is only adjusted through a vote of Livermore residents. So with looking at the different alternatives, came up 3 scenarios that are basically different proportions of a similar approach. There's no residential land use types proposed in any of the alternatives. It's meant to recapture and expand capacity for those industrial uses that I was mentioning. And when we say industrial, that also is a broad category, right? So it's lab spaces or research and development facilities or manufacturing facilities and some logistics and warehousing. But alternative A is mostly industrial. We have some small bit of commercial at the corner of Patterson Pass Road. We have a small research campus or educational facility located adjacent to Greenville Road. The intent being that's where academia and industry can partner to, spin off new technologies and new ways of doing things. And then every alternative has this wine catalyst site down here, the southern portion of the focus area, based on a study commissioned by the Tri-Valley Conservancy and conducted by UC Davis. This area was identified as a potential for grape growing and a good location for potential medium-sized winery or event center or something that could help continue the rejuvenation or revitalization of wine country. So that's why that designation is here. If we look at alternative B, we've expanded the commercial area. We've increased the size of the research campus or educational facility, and we've introduced a new park. And so this is intended to be more of an active park for organized sports, etc. And then lastly, expanded the research campus quite a bit, also expanded the park size, and then relocated the commercial to the Greenville Road corridor. So if we look at the build out projections into 2045, if this were to all be constructed and in operation, this is what the jobs numbers would look like. And again, there's no population growth or housing units in this bar chart because there's none of the residential uses proposed. So we have taken all those alternatives and tried to evaluate them to look at different sets of trade-offs for each of the alternatives so that the community and the project team can have a conversation about what's important to us, how are we going to try to achieve all these goals. And we have to look at a whole host of things, including, are we meeting those state housing requirements, like I mentioned? Are we providing enough inventory for job generating uses for our economy? Are we proposing the right mix of uses that can help sustain our fiscal revenues for the city? And then are we also doing it in a manner that creates a sense of place? Are we making an environment where it's attractive and or inviting and functions the way we want it to. So we try to look at these different alternatives through those 4 lenses, amongst other things. And we tried to capture that in some of these evaluation documents. So we have a summary that's pretty high level, and then we have more detail in a background report. Both these are on the Imagine Livermore 2045 website. We are in the midst of community engagement. You may have seen us at pop-ups. We did have a workshop in October, and as the mayor said, we are having another one November 15th at Croce Elementary. But we also are meeting with focus groups and other community organizations. And then we also have provided an online mapping tool because we understand that not everyone can make it to workshops. And so that mapping tool allows you to look at each one of the focus areas, drop pins, write comments. And then lastly, we are looking at trying to do some virtual webinars because we understand people are busy and we want to try to make it as easy for them to provide comments and feedback as possible. So again, that online activity is at this website. Questions or comments can be sent to gpupdate@citylivermore.net. And again, our next workshop is November 15th at Croce Elementary School. So thank you again for your time. Brandon and I are available for any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you, Andy. It's always the challenge, right? You have numerous opportunities for feedback. So I'm hoping everybody takes advantage of those. Laura, your hand raised.
Good morning. Thank you for this. It's really sort of fun since I'm not doing this the kind of work you're doing this every day, but it's fun to watch. On Monday, I was in a meeting about the Eastern Alameda needs assessments for nonprofits. And looking at these and your different layers of pieces for planning, it made me think about how do the goals and the needs that are coming out of that needs assessment for the citizens. Specifically, I was thinking about the youth and the older adults in the community. Some of their transportation needs that came out of that needs assessment, housing needs for them as they change their lives, and their lives are in different phases. How do those come into play when you guys are looking at the totality of this plan for the city? Even if you were to focus on transportation, for example, because one of the things that came out of this was youth that were struggling to get around town to that they had available to them that aren't always easy to do without a car, without being able to, pile 6 people into their little tiny Datsun like I did when I was a kid.
I'll try to tackle the transportation piece of that. So part of the things we think about for things like the Midtown focus area, that's where that compactness and mix of uses comes into play, where you have a complete neighborhood where one can live and access certain needs and amenities. But we also have to pan out and remember that that's one piece of a larger community. And so the general plan has a circulation element, and that's where we deal with things like roadways, bike trails, other mobility planning at a very high level. Eventually, we have to implement all this through other more focused, tailored planning efforts. So like mobility planning, even if we have a station at Valley Link and the neighborhood builds out, we have to still plan ways for people to get to that station or get from the station to their jobs, etc. And so we actually are meeting with LAVDA staff about this process so they can start preparing and we can coordinate our efforts for public transportation, active transportation, and land use. And I don't know, Brandon, if you wanted to add something to that too.
I think that is exactly right. I think the other way that those kinds of issues work their way into the general plan update is through direct outreach to the planning team and the general plan advisory committee and the council more broadly. So I think if part of the reason we're doing these stakeholder outreach sessions is not only to educate the folks on this call and to educate us from your perspectives, but also to find who else do we need to talk to. So I think that's one that we may want to follow up on. There are also indirect ways that we address some of the issues that you brought up, which is by also including a diversity of housing types that can be more affordable by design, not necessarily meaning subsidized housing, but for example, the average townhome is about $200,000 less than the average single family detached home in Livermore. So as we're thinking about how to facilitate choice and create more inclusion in the community, there are lots of different ways that may not explicitly address that, but do help with that over time.
Thank you, Laura, for the
Well-
question. Awesome.
And I'll just say, and with that, even a townhouse, traditionally townhouses are multi-story.
Yep.
And for older adults wanting to age in place, and if we're trying to get them to maybe move out of their 5-bedroom home
Yep.
where they raise their kids, right? They need to be accessible, single story
Yeah.
elevators, all that kind of stuff.
We could do a whole session on stacked flats and elevators and single story aging in place, but it's a great point. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
And
to
let-
Brandon's point, though, is when we talk about these land use types, everything is a spectrum, right? We have a variety of, when we say residential, it's a spectrum of residential types. When we talk about industrial or job generating uses, it's meant to capture a spectrum of skill sets. And so we use these terms very broadly, but ultimately the general plan will start to refine each of those things.
And
I'm sorry, I was bringing that up because sooner than 2035, 2045, right? In 2030, a quarter of our population will be 60 years and older.
Mm-hmm.
yes, as
Whole
a
different thought.
community partner in our community health assessment. Thank you, Laura, for bringing all that up. That might be something, Brandon and Andy, you guys might want to be looking at, because it is very regional as far as that health needs assessment. And I was going to say 10,000 people turning 65 every day. So yes, might be something to think about. Okay, Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you. Speaking from the quarter that you just mentioned, getting there. Very exciting to see. And I wanted to thank Brandon and Andy too for reaching out to the Alameda County Ag Advisory Council. So I hope we can make that date work. And also for reaching out to visit Tri-Valley, Brandon, I will certainly push to make that a special meeting with
Great.
our board as well. Because of course we're interested in your the commercial aspect and hotel development and tourism and sports, you name it. So I was excited, especially about the Greenville area, looking at, our wine industry as being one of the major draws, and seeing all the different aspects. This ties right in with that wonderful housing, because boy, would I love to be able to afford the new houses that are just a townhouse, but they usually start about 1.2 million. Is there also an aspect to consider about workforce housing when you're developing the wine catalyst area? And is that just all up to the county, and does that mean it's back to me and my committee?
So I'll let Andy jump in here as well. I'll say that the wine catalyst site that is east of Greenville does not contemplate any housing. It's meant to be supportive commercial uses that will help with the revitalization and long-term sustainability of wine country. Obviously, the workforce is critical to that, but I think we're hoping to address workforce housing shortages in other focus areas like the Midtown area, where we'll have transit-oriented community development that will happen there. So no housing east of Greenville, but certainly workforce housing is a top priority from all communities, including Livermore. Andy, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that summarized it. I threw out the term jobs housing match, and that plays into the workforce housing, and also that spectrum of uses we were talking about. So we want to make sure we have a spectrum of housing types for all income levels, and then we also want to make sure we have a spectrum of jobs for all skill levels. And it's both two sides of the same coin, so that someone who can afford to live here can also have the opportunity to work here, and vice versa. Someone who works here could potentially have the opportunity to live here.
And that's what was exciting about Alternative B, was showing all those jobs that were going to be part of that. And I know you do have those RENA numbers, which I also thought was a great way with the additional housing opportunity. and that looked exciting. So thank you.
Tracy, for the question, Alan?
So Brandon and Andy have heard a lot from me over recent times, but I think what I would like to emphasize here is that these plans will have a major impact on the members of the Chamber of Commerce, particularly small businesses. The East Greenville is really oriented more towards large businesses, at least as I have envisioned it. But taking out places like the commercial parks and Las Positas Court, that's going to wipe out the space of 30 small businesses. There's 2 businesses there who had to move from downtown out there for lower rents in order to survive. And so I guess the point that I would like to make and get a response to is that as you take out a lot of the commercial area, which is appropriate for small businesses, even if it's recreated, it's going to be more expensive. And you need to think about small businesses as needing less expensive places to survive.
Yeah, so I can address that. I think you're absolutely right, Alan, and it's very clear that if you remove I don't like to use the term "you remove" because what we're really doing here is saying that the underlying land use is allowed to change. The owners of the buildings can decide what they want to do with that land at that time. They'll certainly have different incentives at that point for what to do with their land. And all the businesses who currently have leases are protected by those leases. So I do want to make sure we're characterizing it correctly, but I think that your point is a good one, that if a 30-year-old industrial office building goes away, a new industrial office building will certainly not be subject to the same economics and not able to charge the same rent and be feasible. So it's not one for one. It's a great point, and I think it is something to look at. I think the important thing, and Alan, you as a member of the GPAC have an unusual amount of influence over this, is to bring the GPAC members, the Planning Commission, and the Council the best information that they can get about what the impacts are, what the trade-offs are, so potential costs and benefits of seeing certain types of uses that may be lower intensity in terms of their development convert into other things. Because we have a city that wants to develop as much as it can inward and preserve its greenbelt spaces as much as it can. It's all trade-offs at that point as we look to accommodate our arena allocation as well as plan for revenue and jobs and placemaking and quality of life and all those things. So I think it is a very good point, and it's certainly not a black and white issue.
Yes, to emphasize the trade-offs, the interests of the property owner, the business renters, and the community are not all the same, and it is a balance of those things, and
Yep.
You have to look at things more than just RENA numbers to make sure you have a balanced community.
Well, and we're certainly not only looking at RENA numbers, as you know, having gone through the evaluations. There are a number of sometimes competing interests, and a healthy community has to balance all of those things. And it can't always be done in complete harmony because there's a limited amount of land.
Alan? David?
I have a quick question regarding the population. Andy and Brandon, what is the projected population at build out?
Andy, maybe you can
Yeah.
pull up some of the range, but it depends on which citywide alternative the council ultimately opts to pursue. And of course, some of that will be dependent also on whether the community elects, if given the option, to move the urban growth boundary. So it's going to be a range, but Andy, maybe you can give rough order of magnitude.
Yeah, we looked at what the projections would be, and so it's anywhere from I think 120 to 130. But David, I can get you that number when I look it up. And then it all depends on the focus areas. Aren't saying this many people will live here. It's saying it can accommodate this many people through this pattern, right? And so we bear in mind what the projections are when we look at that, and do we want to plan for a surplus or try to hit the target? And I think it fluctuates almost every year. So
Brandon, quick question for you. You said that the population might change based on the annexation of East Greenville, but I thought there wasn't going to be any housing out there.
That's true. I think what I'm getting at is the council. Well, so Greenville has less of an impact it has no impact essentially on the housing numbers. But I think when we're looking at how much housing is the council going to feel comfortable allocating onto what is today industrial land, they may want to take into account future opportunities to add new commercial industrial land into the community. So that may not happen as part of the general plan process. A lot of things are contingent on different decision making along the way, but converting more industrial land into housing would present, I would think, some additional challenges, or at least require some additional planning if there's not new inventory that's able to be added to cover long-term infrastructure maintenance costs, operational costs, and places to put jobs. So it's just an influencing factor. It's not directly attributing.
Okay, thank you.
Marshawn? Go ahead, Mayor Marshawn, you have a question?
Okay. Okay. So as you've learned, it's really complicated. But when we were looking at this in 2004, we were estimating that at the end of this run, by 2025, the population of Livermore would be about 100,000 people. And amazingly enough, at the end of this run in 2025, we will be at about 100,000 residents. So it just shows that this planning really does work. And this really, it's the work the staff does really is remarkable, because when we looked at this 20 years ago, we are exactly at that point where we plan to be. To Lara's point about that last mile, that transit, one of the interesting things is in the Bay Area, we have 27 transit agencies that aren't connected. And it really is up to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission to get some better coordination on all of that, because you have all these different organizations that don't work together. So that's, of course, beyond the realm of the city. That's going to be the Metropolitan Transportation Commission that does that. To your point about planning for seniors, remember, most most people that are homeless are seniors. So that's something that we also are considering, that as people age and their income drops relatively, they can't afford to live here. So we've also seen that the majority of people that are homeless are seniors. So as we look to build, to your point again, workforce housing, the city of Livermore has tried to build workforce housing, but because of referendums, lawsuits, initiatives, we've had a very difficult time building workforce housing, and we're going to continue to have difficulties as we provide for senior housing. So yeah, it's really complicated, but that's why we are looking at this, and this is why we want more public input to ensure that what we're doing meets all the needs for the future, because this is a living document that's going to be for the next 20 years. So take your time to comment, please.
And I apologize, I have to run to another commitment, but I think Andy can stay behind maybe for a few more minutes. Thank you all so much for having us. Please come to workshops, use the online tool. We want to give our decision makers, including the mayor, the best information that we can, and we make better policy collectively when you all share your input with us. So we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon.
Yep, thank you for being here.
Any other questions for Andy? The only one left here. Okay. All right. Lots of opportunities. They have given you lots of opportunities to provide input. Thank you for doing that, making those opportunities available. Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah, with that, I think we are going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. So we will